There's a tendency to think of practicing the Dharma as meaning what you do when you sit here with your eyes closed, trying to get the mind in concentration, trying to develop discernment. But we have to remember that the path to awakening is not a one-fold path or a two-fold path. It's a noble eightfold path. And each of the factors in that path requires training. Notice that when the Buddha explained the two factors that have to do with discernment, when he completed his explanation of what that meant, the very next factor was speech, how you talk to another, how you talk to other people, how you talk to yourself. This is an important part of the training, because the way you talk to other people is the way you talk to yourself, and the way you talk to yourself as you're dealing with other people, thinking about the world around you, is going to have an impact on how you talk to yourself as you get the mind into concentration. Think of those factors of directed thought and evaluation. Those are the factors that precede speech. They lie at the basis of all our verbal actions. But they're also part of how you get the mind to settle down. You have to talk to yourself in the right way. So this is something you do train yourself in. You can't say, well, I'm just the way I am, I'm a straight shooter, I just say what I think, and you're going to have to put up with that. That's like saying, my mind is a mess, I can't get into concentration, and we'll just have to accept that fact. We're here to train, we're here to learn new habits. So you think about the Buddha's habits, because he's the ideal example of how to train. Some people write that off, say, well, he's the Buddha, so he's got to be special. But he meant all of his actions, his words, his deeds, his thoughts that he expressed to other people, to be examples to others. This is how you find happiness. This is how you live in the world, finding happiness in a way that's totally harmless. And think of his standards for speech. 1, it was true. 2, it was beneficial. And 3, he knew the right time to say things that were pleasing and the right time to say things that were not pleasing. So he didn't have just one style of speech. He tried to be very attuned to when it was necessary to say things that were displeasing. And he was very sparing in his displeasing words, which meant that they had more of an impact. He used them only when they were necessary. And as a result, people were open to listening to them. I knew an Ajahn in Thailand who tended to be pretty harsh all the time. And I found that my own reaction to his criticism was I just closed myself off, because whatever he said was going to be critical. It was very easy to write that off. Well, that was just his way of speaking. Whereas with Ajahn Fuang, he was very careful. If he was going to say something displeasing, he chose just the right time, the right place, and the right words. It went straight to your heart. It was like he slipped a knife in between your ribs without you expecting it. And that had an impact. Just think about that. True, beneficial, and the right time to be pleasing and the right time to be displeasing. The Buddha took the truth as a very important principle. And sometimes it seems of all the precepts, the precept to say what is true was for him the most important. As he told Rahula, very first lesson to the young boy was, you've got to be truthful. If you can tell a lie deliberately, without any sense of shame, then whatever goodness you have as a contemplative, someone who's devoted to a life of harmlessness, is totally thrown away, turned over, empty. You know the story, he illustrated that with a dipper of water. He washed his feet, He left just a little bit of water in the dipper, and asked Rahula, "Do you see how little water there is here?" And Rahula said yes. And then the Buddha said, "That's how little goodness there is in someone who tells a deliberate lie without any sense of shame." Then he tossed the water away. He says, "You see how that water's tossed away?" Yes. That's what happens to the goodness of someone who tells a deliberate lie without any sense of shame. It gets tossed away. He says, "Now you see how empty the dipper is?" Yes. And the person who tells a deliberate lie without any sense of shame is empty of goodness. Then you turn the dipper over. You get the message. And then he went on to say, try to train yourself that you don't say a falsehood, even in jest. In other words, even in cases where you don't mean to deceive people, you just want to say something funny. The Buddha said, okay, abstain from that kind of speech as well. But then he went on to point out in some of his other teachings that simply because something was true was not reason enough to say it. It has to be beneficial. A lot of things that we could be saying that either give rise to passion, aversion, and delusion in us or in the listener. And in a truth like that, you just leave it unsaid, because it serves no purpose. You try to speak words that are true, that are harmonious, that are easy to listen to, and really serve a purpose. So you have to be very careful about your words, and look at what the Buddha is asking you to do. He's asking you to set up several checkpoints before you speak. If you take that seriously, it means you don't say that much in the course of the day. But then most of us speak too much anyhow. I think I've told you that story about Ajahn Fuang up in the mountains north of Chiang Mai. He was staying with another monk, and he had this very strong sense that there were very strong spirits in the area. And they watched the monks very carefully. One day he and the other monk were on alms round, and one of the lay people putting food in the other monk's bowl asked him a question. And the monk answered, and Ajahn Fuang thought to himself, after having had time with Ajahn Lee and having learned about saying only what was absolutely necessary, he told himself, gee, that wasn't really necessary to answer that question. And later that day, that monk had a bad case of diarrhea. And Ajahn Fuang attributed it to the spirit's strictness about how little you should speak if you're practicing. We talk about the kind of idle chatter that's allowable, the kind of social grease that keeps things going. But there can be too much grease, just like an engine can get too much grease. It mucks up the workings of the engine. So you have to be really careful about what you say. Make sure it's necessary. If it's not necessary, just leave it unsaid. And if you do have critical things to say, try to show respect for the other person. The worst thing you can do in any community is to show contempt for one another. Because that way people close up. So if you're going to criticize someone, show that you're doing it out of goodwill. You have their best interests in mind. And you really decide, okay, this has to be said. And if there's a pleasing way to say it in a pleasing way. Save your displeasing words for extreme circumstances. Because after all, we are living it as a group. And the group can be conducive to meditation. if they give rise to a sense of joy, that we're happy to be here together. Because that's one of the conditions for getting the mind to settle down, a sense of joy. And you can induce it in lots of different ways, but one of the best ways, if you're living as a group, is to make it a group where people are happy to be practicing together. So make sure your speech is the kind of speech that would make people happy to be around you, happy to be practicing the Dharma together with you. And if the speech doesn't come naturally, well, it's the same with concentration. If concentration doesn't come naturally, you have to make it happen. Because this is a training. Those 8 folds of the path come under the triple training. They're things you learn, things that you practice. And by practice, it means learning how to do it right. Recognizing a mistake as a mistake. Making up your mind you don't want to repeat that mistake, because that's the lesson the Buddha gave to Rahula after he taught him about truth. What you really want to look at is be truthful about your intentions. Make sure you don't do anything harmful. If you see that you intend to do an act that will cause harm, you don't do it. And then while you're doing it, you're truthful about watching it. What are the actual results that are coming about? When it's done, you're truthful again. What are the actual results of what you did? When you see a mistake, you recognize it as a mistake. And spread lots of goodwill. Goodwill for yourself, goodwill for the other people. So you're less likely to repeat that mistake. So training in right speech is just as much a part of the practice as training in right mindfulness and right concentration. When the Buddha taught the Eightfold Path, he didn't teach any extra folds, any extra factors that were not necessary. So learn how to give each of the factors the attention it deserves.